What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be doing my update video to our Poison Pulverize build here in Season 9, and this will be probably the most comprehensive Pulverize video that you'll see right now because I'm going to be including a ton of little bugs that I've discovered while playing all the different activities with my Pulverize setup, as well as a small how-to guide on when you're actually playing the build itself. Now, although on the unofficial leaderboards, it only shows that I have cleared a pit tier 102 with my current gear, I actually have cleared a 103, and that gameplay footage will be in this video, but I'm not really going to upload another pit clear until I do like 104 or 106. Also, there is a massive update for us druids, so the patch notes have just dropped for July 15th, and we will be seeing a pretty sizable increase in the damage of our druid. They're going to add 25% to the base damage of our Pulverize skill. And then for those of you who absolutely love Stormclaw builds, they're adding a nice change to the Greater Staff of the Crone that, in my opinion, will definitely see the Stormclaw setup shoot up into possibly a tier 100 pit clear. Now, that being said, a link to all of my builds will be down in the description of this video, as well as a direct link to my leveling and mid-game setup for Pulverize, as well as my in-game Pulverize build. And I'm also going to add a link to Screamheart's Stormclaw build down in the description as well. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the build guide, and we're going to start off with the how-to as well as the bugs I found while playing our Poison Pulverize Druid. So the first thing you're going to want to do before you enter Grizzly Rage is build up your shifting buffs with Claw and Maul. However, sometimes players forget to do that. I myself have forgotten to do that from time to time. So it is no problem to actually work around this issue. All you have to do is emote with your character, and that will force shift you into human form, and then use a werebear skill like Maul or Pulverize to shift you back into your werebear form, and that will build up your shifting stacks. Also, if you play with a controller like I do, the easier version of this would just be to use your teleport, which will force shift you into human form, and then you can use Maul or Pulverize to shift you back into werebear form, and that will bypass you needing to enter the D-pad wheel to select an emote. Now, aside from that, Pulverize is super easy to play. All you're really doing is pulverizing, refreshing your Grizzly Rage whenever you need to, and casting Debilitating Roar to increase your damage and damage reduction. However, you don't want to play Pulverize like you did in previous seasons by standing in one place and pulverizing over and over again. What you want to do is move around your target, whether it be a pack of enemies or a boss, and lay down multiple puddles of poison that overlap onto the target, and then spam your Pulverize on all of the puddles at the same time, which is going to maximize your damage output and really make farming or pushing pits that much easier. So now let's talk about some bugs. So something that I discovered while doing escalation keys with my Pulverize build, and really this applies to any build that's using Grizzly Rage or your shifting buffs, is that once you are finished clearing a dungeon and you swap from one dungeon to the next dungeon, and this includes when you're swapping from your third and final dungeon into your Azeroth fight, you will in fact lose all of your buffs. So you're going to lose all of your shifting buffs, and even though it looks like you're still in Grizzly Rage, you are not. So you have to refresh your Grizzly Rage buff. You will lose all of your armor, you will lose all of your damage, and you'll find that out as soon as you try to move into the next dungeon or into the Azeroth fight. You'll start trying to kill stuff and it will not die as fast, or you will start the boss fight and it will just feel like you cannot kill him. But really that's only because, again, you're not actually in Grizzly Rage. It just looks like you're in Grizzly Rage. So what I like to do is at the beginning of every single dungeon, I like to build up my shifting buffs again and then refresh my Grizzly Rage. So that way I actually have all of those buffs up before I start the next dungeon or the boss fight. Another little bug I discovered has to do with the Harbinger fight. So one of the mechanics while you're fighting the Harbinger is once you push him to a certain % life, he will leave the battlefield by jumping through a portal, and then that will spawn a bunch of portals around you that you have to clear off the map before you can finally deal damage back onto the boss. And a way to destroy these portals outside of just your own damage is to collect these little glowing orbs and fire a holy blast of energy that will destroy all of the portals it hits. However, the issue is when you pick up these glowing orbs, it will completely strip you of your Grizzly Rage, leaving you without any damage and all of the damage reduction to survive this boss fight. So unless you have the damage to clear these portals by yourself without picking up the glowing orbs, I highly recommend that you just skip it altogether. And I personally don't even do this fight right now in hardcore because of the potential to accidentally hit one of these orbs, which will immediately strip me of all of my buffs. And if I get hit while I'm outside of Grizzly Rage, it's definitely going to one-shot my character, and I don't feel like losing this character yet. This next bug has to do with fighting the world boss, and this really isn't that big of a deal. However, it can be a bit of a nuisance when you're in the early stages of building up your pulverized build, but when you go to fight the boss, you'll find out pretty fast that it, for some reason, when you deal overpowers to the boss, it's not actually extending the duration of your Grizzly Rage. In fact, it seems like the game is actually classifying world bosses as normal enemies, so when you're dealing damage to these world bosses, you will see your Grizzly Rage timer running out, and if you do not have enough duration or cooldown on your Grizzly Rage, it will drop off and you will have to go through the entire cooldown just to pop back into your Dire Bear form. And then last but not least, and this is a big one if you plan on pushing high tier pits, there is a bug between tile sets in terms of the splash mechanic of your Rotting Lightbringer. And you'll see here on the gameplay footage I'm showing you on screen that when I'm doing the tile set that looks like a wooded mountainous area, it seems like the splash effect is missing the majority of its damage when I'm hitting my poison puddles with Pulverize, which dramatically cuts my damage and slows down my pit clear. Now, the cool thing is, on this exact map, when I went into the next floor, it was the prison floor, and that tile set has a much smoother ground surface, and you'll notice how suddenly my damage is just 10 times better than what it was in the previous map tiles, and I'm clearing out these mob packs with no issue at all. Now, I'm not exactly certain of all of the different tile sets that this is happening on, but I do notice that when it comes to the wooded, mountainous looking tile set, as well as the ice caverns, I've noticed a significant drop off in my damage. So if you are pushing up into high tier pits, looking for a shot at the unofficial leaderboards, or just doing it for your own enjoyment, if you do land on one of these tile sets, I would just go ahead and leave that pit because it pretty much spells the end for your pit clear due to the massive amount of damage drop off that happens. So let's go ahead and go over the gear pieces. So on our helmet, we're using the Arrow of Perdition, obviously for that big damage multiplier, as well as that huge chunk of critical strike chance and core skill ranks, but it does also have the nice added bonus of giving us a big chunk of movement speed as well. Then on the chest, we're using Shroud of False Death, and this is probably the best overall mythic unique in the game right now because it gives us +1 to all of our passives, and Druid relies heavily on all of its passives. And you can see here we do have 2 crits in all stats. Now the best Shroud would be a 2GA Shroud to all stats and max life with all of our Masterwork crits going in to all stats, but this is what we have currently, and it works perfectly fine. On our gloves, we have max life, willpower, and pulverized ranks with pulverized size as well as Grizzly Rage duration. And the max life affix can be flexed out if you're playing softcore or if you're a comfortable skilled player in hardcore for something like attack speed. I just prefer the max life, especially when I'm farming up bosses like Andariel to avoid getting one shot from some of the mechanics in that boss fight. Now, we did get super lucky and we managed to farm up a 4GA Tybalt's Will. It does not have a max multiplier, but 18% is pretty much perfect. You know, that extra 2%, you really wouldn't be able to tell much of a difference. And for our Tybalt's Will, I really want to have all 3 of my Masterwork crits into the damage reduction affix. However, if you wanted to maximize damage, you would obviously go after the all stats. On the boots, we're using Ursine Horror because Ursine Horror was changed to a utility aspect this season, and we're going with Willpower Max Life, a roll of armor because we need that to reach armor cap, and then we're going movement speed and pulverize size for our temperings. Now, if you do need a little bit more armor, you may need to get a Masterwork crit into the armor affix. However, the best setup would be 3 crits into willpower. And then our weapon is none other than the Rotting Lightbringer, which is the only reason why Pulverize is popping off this season. And this unique weapon is really great. It's probably the best designed unique I've seen in a long time, especially on the Druid. And you can see we currently have a 1GA for chance for Pulverize to hit twice. Now for prioritization on this weapon, which I see a lot of people confused about, you definitely want to go with the higher multiplier on your weapon passive before you prioritize a specific GA. But if you have a really high multiplier, obviously the best GA after that would be a chance for Pulverize to hit twice, followed by willpower. For our amulet, we're slotting in the Rabid Bear aspect here, and this is going to change all of our damage to poison damage, which is another big reason why we're amping our damage up so much this season. And then for our current amulet, we have Willpower, Resonance, and Envenom, with our temperings being Earth Critical Strike chance as well as Grizzly Rage cooldown. Now the best amulet would be Willpower, Envenom, and Toxic Claws with all of your Masterwork crits going into Envenom. Now on our first one, we're going Willpower, Max Life, and Resist to all elements, and you will need a resist roll here because you won't be able to cap out your resistances without it. And then we're running a little bit of resource generation. Now, you won't need that tempering if you do have a GA to resource cost reduction on your Rotting Lightbringer. However, I currently don't, so I get a little bit more out of resource generation. And then we're also picking up some more Earth Critical Strike chance just to cap out our Critical Strike at 100%. And then lastly, we have our Ring of Starless Skies, and I would prefer all of my Masterwork crits to be in attack speed, but I just haven't remasterworked my item to do that. Now onto our first rune word, we're using Ahu Quas on our pants, and that's to give us a consistent double damage with our Pulverize. Now if you are having trouble with resources, it is perfectly fine to run something like Neo Quas or Nagu Quas, but you will have to swap some skill points into your companions if you want to run Nagu Quas. Then for the second rune word, we're running Igni Kree. Now, I really love Kree for that pull to gather all the enemies close together, and I've seen a significant damage increase when I do use this rune word. However, other good combinations are Igni Ohm or Igni Vex. Both of those are very reliable for increasing your damage and can be very useful for pushing into high tier pits. Now into the jewels, and we're going to be socketing in the Scornful Light jewel in our amulet. It's going to give us a nice damage multiplier, but it does also give us a 10% increase to the damage that we take from elemental sources, so do be aware of that. Then onto the first ring, we're socketing in the Idol from Below jewel, and we're going to go over why this is so good in just a second. And then last but not least, we're using the Herodric Crest jewel here, and this gives us a nice amount of damage reduction based on the different types of Arcana we have equipped, as well as increases our overall resistance caps, which does a lot in terms of damage reduction from non-physical sources. Now moving on to our Herodric spell, and we are going to be using Disintegrate, and that is going to be over Pulverize. So every time we cast Pulverize, whenever this spell's off cooldown, it will automatically proc, and this is really useful for maintaining all of our Arcana buffs. For the infusion, we're running Corrosive Vapor just to cancel out vampiric effects. Then on our first Arcana slot, we're going to be using Bloody Charm to execute non-boss enemies when they hit 20% life. And this is very useful for clearing pits fast. However, when you're doing your normal farming, it's perfectly fine to swap this to Shifting Powder to increase your movement speed. Then we're running Reactive Ooze just to fill up our spirit that much faster when we proc our Quas rune. However, once we have a better Rotting Lightbringer, we can swap out of this to something like the Fractured Core Arcana just to increase our overall damage while we're clearing pits. And then we're going to be running Sapping Crux for the easy access to vulnerability. Now, something I didn't go over in the last video was the Consumables, which is a very important part of this build as well as any build you're using in Season 9. So for the elixirs, I like to go for the Elixir of Advantage or the Elixir of Fortitude. I prefer the Elixir of Fortitude when I'm doing bossing just to give me a little bit more health so I don't get one shot by any of the mechanics. Then for the incense, we're going with Blessed Guide for more willpower, Redomain Buzz to increase our overall max life, and then Soothing Spices, which gives us a ton of resistances as well as armor and increases our resistance caps. Now onto our spirit boons. On the deer, we're using Gift of the Stag for the 10 spirit generation. Then we're bonded into the eagle, and we're using swooping attacks for the attack speed as well as Avian Wrath for the critical strike damage multiplier. However, if you prefer to be a little bit more tanky, Iron Feather is definitely a choice over swooping attacks. Then on the wolf, we're going to be using Energize because we have no problem maintaining our Grizzly Rage. Now, if you are having issues with maintaining Grizzly Rage, it's perfectly fine to swap this to Calamity. However, your end goal would be to maintain Energize. Then on the snake, we're running Masochistic, and you could pretty much run any boon you'd prefer. Now for our skill tree, we're running Claw and Maul. For our shifting buffs, then we're going down to our core skill tree. We're going 1 point Heart of the Wild, 3 points Wild Impulses. Then we're going 5 points Pulverize into Raging Pulverize, just to increase the damage of our Pulverize. Then we're picking up 3 points into Iron Fur, just to increase our damage reduction while we're in Werebear form. After that, we're moving down to our defensive tree, going 1 point Cyclone Armor. Now, I see a lot of people question, why do you have Cyclone Armor on when it's not on your bar? And that is because we still maintain the passive elemental damage reduction from Cyclone Armor, even while we're in Werebear form. Then we're picking up 3 points into Backlash, as well as 3 points in Ancestral Fortitude. Then we're going 1 point into Debilitating Roar into Innate Debilitating Roar, just to increase our damage when we cast the skill. Now, I will go ahead and say that you can flex out some points of Ancestral Fortitude if you want to decrease the cooldown of Debilitating Roar, or move them into whatever passive you prefer on your skill tree. Down to the companion skill tree, we're going 3 points into feral aptitude. Now, like I said, if you are running the Nagu Quas rune word, you will have to put points into wolves as well as 3 points into ravens just to get the 3 ravens up. Then moving down into our wrath tree, we're going 3 points mending, 3 points provocation, and then 3 points crushing earth as well as 3 points stone guard. For our ultimate skill tree, we're going 3 points in defiance, 3 points into natural disaster, 3 points into resonance, basically all of the damage passives. Then we are going to go 5 points into Grizzly Rage to reduce the cooldown, as well as pick up the added armor bonus we get for a 5 for 5 rank this season. And then we're going to obviously pick up Supreme Grizzly Rage to get that easy 4 to 5 for our character. And then we're going 3 points Quick Shift and 3 points Heightened Senses. I like to have Heightened Senses here because I play in hardcore and the damage reduction is very useful. And then last but not least for our key passive, it's going to be none other than Ursine Strength. Now moving on to our first Paragon board, we're going to be socking in the Headhunter glyph here, and this glyph is even better this season because of the massive roll of willpower percent you get on your Rotting Lightbringer, and that is a big reason why we are running this glyph, because we're getting that juiced up amount of willpower just from having so much willpower percent on our gear pieces. Then the second board is going to be Earthen Devastation. We're obviously picking up the Earthen Devastation legendary node, and then we're going to be socketing in our Fang and Claw glyph here. Another good glyph here could be Earth and Sky. I just like Fang and Claw. Doesn't really matter. Then our third board is going to be the Survival Instincts board, and then we're going to be socketing in our Keeper glyph here. Then on to our fourth board, that's going to be the Heightened Malice board to give us that big damage multiplier when we're surrounded by poison enemies, and we're always going to be surrounded by poison enemies. And then we're going to be socketing in our Spirit glyph here and picking up all the dexterity nodes we can once we reach that point with our Paragon level. And then last but not least, our Ancestral Guidance board, which is going to give us a nice big damage multiplier. And then for our glyph, we're going to be slotting in the Dominate glyph here to increase our overpower damage. And then for the last part of the build, our Mercenary, we're going to be running Subo because we finally have enough resistances to drop right here. But if you do not have those resistances capped, always go with Rahir. He has a ton of good stuff as well as some nice skills himself. And then for our Reinforcement Mercenary, we are going to go with Rahir, and we're using the Bastion skill, and that's attached to our Pulverize. But that's really it for the video, guys. That is my update for our Poison Pulverize Druid here in Season 9. And like I said, we're going to be getting a pretty sizable chunk of damage in the patch that's coming up on the 15th, so be on the lookout for that. And a link to this build will be down in the description of this video, and I will be moving on to my Wolves build, which is already set up and ready to go. I just have to get some gameplay footage for that video. And as always, if you have any questions whatsoever, feel free to post them down in the comment section of this video, and I will answer them as soon as I see them. And I will be streaming all weekend long, so if you do have a question and you want to answer it right away, stop by the stream, post it out in the chat, and I'll answer it for you right there. Oh, and I will also be putting a link to the Mobalytic Spotlight build video that they did for my Pulverize Druid here in Season 9, so I was really excited to see that, and man, if I had those editing skills, I would probably be sitting at somewhere around 50k subscribers by now, but unfortunately, we don't have that kind of ability right now. But anyways, guys, as always, hope you're having a great day or a great night, depending on wherever you're from, and peace out. I will see you in the next one.